I'm addicted to stress, that's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long. And I hang around like a bum, and I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. I'm addicted to stress, it's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long. And I hang around like a bum, I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me.
It's the little things to get you, it's the little things to get you when you weren't paying attention. It's the little things to get you, it's the little things to get you. It's the little things to get you when you weren't paying attention.
I'm trying to cut down on my caffeine consumption, so when I get up, I just have one cup of coffee, and I like to have another cup of coffee with my breakfast. And on the way to work, I like to get a cup of coffee, like the kind of cup of coffee that you get with the donuts. If I never get the donut, I just have the cup of coffee. And when I get to work, I like to have a cup of coffee, because I like to have a coffee when I'm talking on the phone. But it usually goes cold, and I need to get another cup of coffee, and it's lunch, and I have an espresso. And when I get back, it's not morning anymore, so I have a Diet Cola and another Diet Cola. And by then I'm feeling fine, and I'm feeling pretty sharp, and I'm feeling pretty wired, and I'm getting things done. But right about 2, I get this little tiny migraine, and it starts behind my eyes, and it moves to the back of my neck, and it moves to the bottom of my spine. But it doesn't get there till 5 or 6 o'clock, which is the end of the day. So I'm fine, so I'm fine, so I'm fine. Except when I have to work late, which I usually do. I'm addicted to stress, that's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long. And I hang around like a bum, and I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me.
It's the little things to get you, it's the little things to get you when you weren't paying attention. It's the little things to get you, it's the little things to get you, it's the little things to get you when you weren't paying attention.
I love to work, I love to run, I love to play real hard. I love to steal little things from the grocery store, like a piece of bubble gum, or sometimes I just stick my thumb in a peach and leave it there. I love to work, I love to run, I love to water ski, snowboard, jet ski, skydive, parasail, hang glide, rollerblade, mountain bike, bungee jump. Well, I mean, I love to do these things if I ever have the time. I love to work, I love to work, I love to work out after work. I love to spend a little time with this woman that I'm seeing, so we never really get a little time to spend together. So we call each other up and we talk about work. But what I think I really love is to get up by myself on a little tiny island in the middle of the ocean with just me, a book, and a cellular phone, and a personal computer in case something came up. And I'd eat, and I'd drink, and I'd run, and I'd sleep, and I wouldn't do nothing except swim all day. Except I don't know how to do laps in the ocean. Where are the sharks? Where are the sharks? And there's this kind of anemone that sticks in your foot, and the poison goes up to your brain, and you die. And sand fleas, yuck! But actually, I think it'd be really relaxing, just me by myself in the middle of the ocean, and that's what I'd really love to do more than anything else. Except I probably hate it. I'm addicted to stress, that's the way that I get things done. If I'm not under pressure, then I sleep too long, and I hang around like a bum, and I think I'm going nowhere, and that makes me nervous. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's out to get me, but I feel alright. Everybody's thinking about me. Everybody's thinking about me.
I like good pussy and I like good trees. Smoke so much weed you wouldn't believe. And I get more ass than a toilet seat. 3 to the 1, from the 1 to the 3. I met a bad bitch last night in the D. Let me tell you how I made her leave with me. Conversation and Hennessy. I've been to the motherfucking mountaintop. Heard motherfuckers talk, seen them drop. If I ain't got a weapon, I'ma pick up a rock. And when I bust your ass, I'm gonna continue to rock. Get your ass on the wall with your 2 left feet. It's real easy, just follow the beat. Don't let that fine girl pass you by. Look real close, cause stroll like we about to have a party. Let's get it started. I'm looking for a girl with a body and a sexy strut. Wanna get it poppin', baby, step right up. Some girls, they act retarded. Some girls are body. I'm looking for a girl that will do whatever the fuck I say. Every day she be giving it up. Shake that ass for me. Shake that ass for me. Come on, girl, shake that ass for me. Shake that ass for me. Girl, shake that ass for me. Shake that ass for me. Come on, girl, shake that ass for me. Shake that ass for me. I'm a menace, a dentist, and all hygienist. Open your mouth for.
Vent le calme, amores. Oh my fuck. That video makes me laugh every fucking time. And we're going to be starting out the gate with 2 super chats from Rick Sheck. Thank you very much. He says, yay, Sevy's here, and what's new with you? Well, actually, there's something quite interesting new with me. And that's that I'm basically getting my ID in order to get insurance in Florida, the same way that, well, Cuban immigrants do. I am having to get proof of residence and a voter registration card. And this is how immigrants get their IDs in order to get services without actually being part of the country. So while I am doing things that I consider completely fucked up from a libertarian point of view, it's also completely fucking necessary and hilarious. I'm getting to learn a lot about the loopholes through which people get into our country and take advantage of it. So yeah, I mean, there's that. There's the game I'm working on, which I haven't gotten a lot done with this week. I've been doing some research work for some friends and some other things like that. So, I mean, I haven't had all the time in the world. Not to mention, going in to do paperwork shit like this, you sit around for 6 hours in order to talk to someone for 30, 45 minutes at best. So most of my time this week has been spent waiting in waiting rooms and talking to people with accents that make me wonder how the fuck they have jobs, and I don't. Although I do think I do have the best job in the world right now, and that is sharing the news with y'all. Because this is, after all, 7 at 7, the least watched name in news, and we've got quite a lot of stories to go with, including one that I just found right before I started the show that I felt was very important to share. It's going to tie into another story we're going to get into, but I'm going to start with this one, and do apologize for the slammy doors in the background. I didn't tell my roommate that I was starting the stream, so I think she's irritated that I'm echoing through the house with my voice. But yeah, let us dive right into it, starting over at Zero Hedge with our dear friend Tyler Durden, who is talking about Mueller's right-hand man. Mueller's right-hand man represented Hillary Clinton IT staffer who installed her illegal server. In a trend which surprised exactly nobody, another member of the Mueller team has been found to have deep ties to Trump's opponents. Fox News host Tucker Carlson has obtained documents which reveal Aaron Zebley, considered to be a special counsel Robert Mueller's right-hand man, defended Hillary Clinton's IT staffer Justin Cooper, a Bill Clinton aide that installed the private and illegal server in the Clintons' Chappaqua home, described by Politico as jerry-rigged. This, of course, is the email server and the private BlackBerry communications server that they used in order to bypass all of the government accountability services put into place to prevent the exact kinds of things that Hillary Clinton and her team did between 2009 and 2015. Zebley, a former Wilmer Hale partner who defended Cooper in 2015 in front of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, was specifically called out in a letter to Cooper for stonewalling the investigation and his complete refusal to engage the committee in a discussion about how to further assuage your concerns. Carlson points out that Zebley's history as an attorney linked to Hillary Clinton is a compromised position. And we're going to pass it off directly to our good friend Tucker Carlson to finish this off.
This is a Fox News alert. Documents obtained exclusively by this show a few hours ago show that yet another key player in the Mueller independent counsel investigation has deep ties to the Democratic Party establishment. His name is Aaron Zebley. He is described in media reports as Mueller's right-hand man. Back in 2015, Zebley was a lawyer in private practice, and he represented Hillary Clinton IT staffer Justin Cooper. Cooper is the one who, personally put in the Secretary of State's private illegal server in her Chappaqua home. Congressional investigators sought to meet with Cooper, but they were stonewalled again and again by Zebley. Documents that we obtained today show the frustration of the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee in trying to get to Mr. Cooper because, and we're quoting now, Mr. Zebley telephoned Homeland Security Committee staff to inform them that Cooper had chosen to cancel the interview. In a letter to Cooper, congressional investigators complained that, quote, "We are troubled by your attorney," referring to Zebley, "his complete refusal to engage the committee in a discussion about how to further assuage your concerns." Take that in for a minute. A lawyer who played a defense role in the federal investigation into Hillary Clinton is now playing an offensive role in the federal investigation into President Trump.
Sorry about that. There was a little bit of background noise that was definitely making it into the mic, and I didn't want that to cover up what Tuck was saying. I really do want you to consider that, though. We're looking at the same attorney who was blocking any investigation into Hillary Clinton's servers now taking an active, aggressive role into investigating Trump. And this being the same week that so much of the Trump-Russia collusion story breaking down hard, a story we're going to be going into further during the show. And it's really, really bizarre, don't you think? I mean, we are starting to see through the cracks in all of these media-controlled and, left and right cabal-controlled outlets and all of their attempts to support their desired candidates. We are starting to see through the investigative wings of the government who are trying to attack a president who has done quite a lot of fucking good for this country, if I do say so myself, in just his first year. And while the American people probably won't, before the end of this year, begin to change their mind about Donald Trump or about any of the situations which have been laid at his feet, we are able to at least speak with authority now when we say that not only did Trump have nothing to do with this, the investigations against him are entirely partisan in nature, designed to distract and even derail the work that he's doing. To continue the article, the news about Mueller's right-hand man is directly linked to FBI agent Peter Strzok, the man fired from Mueller's probe who headed up both the Clinton email investigation and the original Trump-Russia investigation, and was caught sending anti-Trump/pro-Hillary texts to his mistress. This makes two original Mueller investigators directly linked to the Clinton email investigation. According to journalist Sarah Carter, more anti-Trump messages have reportedly been sent by members of Mueller's team, stating on Sean Hannity's program this week, a lot more is going to come out. And of course, our dear friend from Zero Hedge, Tyler Durden, goes on to detail things we've all heard before, but I'm going to cover them again. As we've been reporting since the Mueller investigation began, the special counsel is a hot partisan mess, stacked with investigators who have donated to Obama, Clinton, and other Democratic causes. As Jessica McBride reported in Heavy, Andrew Weissman is a Barack Obama and Democratic campaign donor, according to federal records. Weissman, who led the Enron investigation, previously gave $2,300 to Obama's first presidential campaign in 2008 and $2,000 to the Democratic National Committee in 2006. Jean-Marie donated $5,400 to Hillary Clinton in 2015 and 2016, according to FEC records. The records show that she gave $2,500 each to Obama for America and the Obama Victory Fund in 2012 and in 2011. And to Obama Victory Fund 2012 in 2011. Goldstein contributed a combined $3,300 to Obama's campaigns in 2008 and 2012. FEC records show that Greg Andres has donated at least $2,700 to Senator Kristen Gillibrand, the Democrat from New York. James Quarles donated thousands of dollars to the campaigns of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, Elizabeth Preligar is a former law clerk to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Elena Kagan, and gave, well, much less, notably. And the rest of these people I don't terribly give much of a fuck about, because it appears that they are more in this to try and get their foot in the door with the Democrats, rather than having their position maintained with the Democrats with large donations. But yeah, I was very happy to find this story. This actually broke yesterday, but this is the first I've been hearing of it, and I heard about it at the beginning of the show, so I really wanted to cover it. But we are going to take a rapid jump over to North Korea in a segment of the show I like to call Fuck China. And as this tabloid article, which is unfortunately the best article I could find on the subject, tries to present, North Korea faces mass starvation as millions at risk of famine. Why? Because we're going to force China to cut off any oil deliveries, any oil, we're sanctioning North Korea further and further. Hold on a minute, we've got someone coming in the door. Hey.
What's up? They work the shit out of me, they don't give a damn. Since 6 o'clock this morning.
Damn, I'm in the middle of a show, sorry. No worries, no worries. Now, where was I? Yes. We are, Trump has directly requested from Xi Jinping sanctioning the oil supply that China provides to North Korea to maintain its power, quoting, and I'm quoting when I say this, they can't launch rockets if they don't have the fuel. Let's go through the article, because this is absolutely fascinating, and I think it actually says more about China than it does North Korea, because, I mean, no one is completely without understanding that North Korean people are on the brink of starvation for the most part, right? I mean, we're talking about a country that focuses all its money on one family, the Kim family, and everyone else can basically go fuck themselves within those borders. Sources inside North Korea claim Kim Jong-un has stepped up preparations for war with the U.S. without having enough food for his soldiers. The beggar country could be tipped over the edge if a plan to cut off its oil supply goes ahead, experts warn. Donald Trump has called on Kim's ally China to impose even harsher sanctions on North Korea in a bid to halt its nuclear weapons program. But he has been warned this could send the country back to the Dark Ages. David von Hippel, senior associate at the Nautilus Institute for Security and Sustainability, said, unless China or the rest of the world exported or gifted food to North Korea to compensate, this would likely lead to famine. No fucking duh, the country is on the brink of famine anyways. And with the continued sanctions on food, on trade, and now on oil, we are absolutely looking at a situation where North Korea is getting exactly what it fucking set itself up to get. Every country involved with North Korea has been propping up a mad dictator who completely takes advantage of his people, who are utterly starved while they're worked to death, quite literally, if not in, the major cities, in work camps all across the nation. And there is absolutely no way you can convince me that this is anyone's responsibility but Kim Jong-un's. However, news outlets really have wanted to push the idea that this is a horrible humanitarian situation, but this is the horrible humanitarian situation that Kim Jong-un, his father and his grandfather, Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, have set up for this nation by creating a dynastic, centralized family that has and controls everything at the expense of its millions of people in population. North Korea is a largely mountainous region that outside the capital of Pyongyang suffers from very poor standards of living and is heavily reliant on farming. It experienced a devastating famine between 1994 and 1998, Over 1 million people are estimated to have died. Since the famine, most people in rural regions live isolated, humble existences, despite the government propaganda boasting of nationwide prosperity. The North Korean army is already struggling to find resources, according to reports coming out of the country. YouTube is still blocking shit. I'm sorry about that, Ghost Dog. If your messages get blocked in YouTube chat, I've disabled all of that shit, and yet it's still trying to block messages that are sent in my live chat. I will just open the message along for you, so if you see that, I'm truly sorry. North Korean army is already struggling to find resources, according to reports coming out of the country. A source inside Gyeongsang province said the 12th Army Corps began exercises on the 1st of the month, but the leading commander said during opening inspections that they had merely received orders to carry out the drills, but had not received any accompanying provisions. Quite the disconcerting welcome. After this, the soldiers were taken through the ideological and physical drills. Ideological drills. Active brainwashing in the military before any sort of physical training. Yeah, this is an army that's going to be able to put up a fight. And told to express their enthusiasm for becoming young heroes of the nation, but their reactions were lukewarm at best. Soldiers are now ordered to acquire their own supplies, a stark contrast to the situation under Kim Jong-un's predecessor, Kim Jong-il, who ensured that they were well fed and feasted on the first of every month. It's quite absurd that military personnel have to collect their own provisions themselves, and such orders were handed down in all provinces, covering all military divisions across the country, said the source. The Kaspan region is one of many to suffer from increased looting and raiding by the military on civilian villages and fields. Soldiers from the 43rd Brigade swept out across a large farm on November 2nd at night and plundered the corn, an unusual event before recent times, according to the source. A North Korean defector revealed, the main difficulty conscripts must endure is constant hunger. Soldiers in the special units are well taken care of, but those stationed outside the capital of Pyongyang are only given 2 or 3 potatoes per meal, or are fed solely on raw corn kernels or corn rice. The defector went on to say the military police are always on the lookout for soldiers who have escaped to look for food. Sometimes these soldiers steal from civilians and farming stockrooms because they're so hungry. If it's edible, they'll steal it. I've heard that some senior officers will even order soldiers to go out and steal. If they fail, they may be punished. They told The Sun, in my high school class there were 25 boys. 5 went to college and the remaining 20 went to military. Half of those were returned home suffering from the effects of malnutrition. Soldiers are given home leave to recover. Most are too weak to even walk by themselves, so their parents pick them up and feed them back to health. When they improve, they return to the army. The lucky ones serve in the special unit or serve under good officers who will take care of them. The unlucky ones die of hunger before their parents have a chance to help them. The only thing these parents pray for is the safe return of their sons. The UN Security Council capped North Korea's crude imports in December. At this time, President Trump called for a blanket ban, but conceded to appease Russia and China. However, I want you to take key note here that Russia comes first, even though Russia is not North Korea's greatest ally. In fact, they are the only other greater detractor for North Korea than the United States. They come in a very close second because they will not, as seen in Syria, have, a war taking place right next to their borders, as such an event will lead to migrants flooding into Russia and leeching off of their system. This is something Russia just does not accept, will not accept on any level. They don't do that. That's one of the reasons that they prop up Uzbekistan so much. It's one of the reasons they prop up Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan so much, because they want a buffer between them and the rest of the, shithole that is Asia. But the fact of the matter is, despite what this article has to say, this isn't a problem for the United States. This is a problem for China. China, up until this point, has basically been able to keep Kim Jong-un under thumb and keep the United States at bay by appeasing the North Korean regime. But at this point, not even China is able to handle the situation they've been presented with. This is further exacerbated by the growing enculturation from Indian and Japanese sources in China, weakening the cultural stronghold that the Chinese Communist Party once held. China is not doing as well as everyone thinks. And while they would never admit it, because why in God's name would a communist nation ever admit that they're having problems? What we're seeing here is a slow weakening of China in the face of its overspending and constant economic manipulation of itself and the world abroad. China is spreading itself way too thin, and at this point, their downfall is going to be North Korea. It's pretty fucking obvious at this point, and if Kim Jong-un makes a stupid move, it's not going to be a problem for North Korea, because North Korea has had this problem for decades. Famine and starvation are a constant threat and problem, as this very tabloid very clearly explains. But as soon as that problem shows the weakness, the fallibility of the Kim dynasty and their so-called God kings that they love so much, those people are going to leave. Those people are going to flee into China, create an enormous refugee crisis within China, and we're going to see all of the cracks in the Chinese government begin to weather more and shatter its supposed financial greatness. This isn't an American problem. All Trump has done is encourage other nations to stop propping up a country that takes advantage of them for no benefit to themselves other than avoiding so-called nuclear war. And even if Kim Jong-un is able to get a nuclear weapon off the ground, the most he's going to be able to do is nuke a nation that has already survived 2 nukes, and in doing so, turn the entire Pacific Rim into a very short-lived battlefield that will turn North Korea into glass, will just disintegrate it entirely for the purpose of cutting off the snake at the head, as described by the special services within South Korea, who are trained specifically for the purpose of taking out Kim Jong-un and all of his advisors and leaders, subordinate leaders. This shit's getting interesting, but it's not going to go the way that everyone thinks it's going to go. Yes, there's going to be famine, but that's nothing new for North Koreans. There could entirely be well, it wouldn't be a war the way people like to think of war, but there very likely could be a war. And that war will look exactly like what wars look like in the Middle East right now, especially wars in Iraq and Syria. A quick, decisive action, which doesn't last more than 3 months to a year at best, and then a nation that is completely war-torn, basically forcing all of its residents, all of its citizens, to move into South Korea, into Japan, and into China, because Russia already has a military force right on that northern border, north of the mountains, ready to say, hey, no, get the fuck back, you go the other way. I mean, that's what they're gonna fucking do. And this is why this looks so bad for China, and not Trump or anyone else. I'm very glad that this is going this way, honestly. As heartless as that may sound, as unhumanitarian as that may sound, I'm a caring person, but I'm not a stupid person. Kim Jong-un and his predecessors, Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, created this problem long ago. And Donald Trump is the first person to finally say, look, we are not going to prop up your drug and liquor addiction. Ghost Dog, oh, thank you so much for the super chat. Ghost Dog sends $2 and says, if China falls, we are in trouble. No, we're actually not. And I think that's a huge misconception that people have. While it will have devastating effects across the world for a short period of time, it will essentially free up economics and allow the restabilization of world economics everywhere but Europe, honestly. Africa will be able to stabilize by regaining its own, resources, oil, diamond, coal, gold, copper, and be able to use them for themselves, thereby fixing problems in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in most of the wealthy Democratic Republic of Congo, the wealthy portions of Africa, wealthy in resources, that is. And, I mean, you just have to look at it. You have to look at the long game when it comes to geopolitics. As soon as if China falls, Russia is going to rapidly fill in the gap for them. And I know a lot of people think of Russia as the American enemy, but they haven't been an American enemy for a long time. All Russia wants to do is work for the benefit of Russia, not against other people, and especially not against the United States, who are arguably their best option for an ally at this point in time. So, and if you don't believe me, definitely go look into the economics of Russia and the economics of China, and look how much overlap they have. Once China, like companies like Foxconn and other Apple-invested companies get taken down there, Russia has the corporations to fill in that gap and provide the cheap electronics development, the cheap product development. And in the United States, we're getting our steel industry back. We're getting our labor industries back. We have been seeing increases in jobs between 100 and 300,000 jobs per month by the redevelopment of our coal industries, the redevelopment of our steel industries, the redevelopment of our car industries. Hell, this month Donald Trump had a conversation with the Japanese Prime Minister about increasing the car development, the number of car factories in the United States. And that will bring further American jobs that can't be done by the limited Japanese population. Jay Will makes a great point in the chat. Britain also used to be an enemy of America, and now America and Britain are the closest of allies, some of the best of friends, benefiting each other in extremely good ways. At this point, it's just a matter of time before we start seeing the world move towards, I honestly believe, something closer to a golden age again. Now, it won't be perfect. It never is. It's going to be a lot more individualistic, which means people like me are going to have trouble, unless, of course, I'm able to get this entertainment/news and content production thing truly off the ground. But I'm going to be working my ass off for that. Besides, I've got another job on top of providing research work for patrons and anyone who donates, should they request, so it's not like I'm in the worst position. And Levi, Lord of Cancer in the chat, is absolutely right. The EU is a problem, but we're going to be getting to that a little bit later. For now, I want to talk about something a little bit more positive, something I've been waiting on literally all year. Bitcoin futures. Now, if you've been watching the show for a while, you know I've bitched a lot about the FCC, the FEC, the Federal Exchange Commission, basically blocking out every company and delaying every company that has wanted to build Bitcoin derivative and Bitcoin futures on American markets from even having the option, even going so far as to revoke exchanges from being able to do exchange with US dollars. However, we are going to see a big change in this with the coming year as the companies SIBO and CME begin trading on the on US stock exchanges with futures trading. Bitcoin futures trading brings crypto into the mainstream. The latest intersection of digital money and traditional finance is at 400 South LaSalle Street in Chicago this weekend. That's where trading in Bitcoin futures opens Sunday evening as the first major U.S. exchange offers a product pegged to the wildly fluctuating cryptocurrency. The currency has risen more than 1,500% this year, and about 85% in just the past 2 weeks, driven largely by demand from individual investors. But even as Bitcoin, launched in 2009 as an alternative to banks, divides Wall Street executives and central bankers worldwide, those kinds of gains are a powerful magnet. Futures offered by SIBO Global Markets Incorporated and similar contracts started trading in a week at another Chicago-based exchange, CME Group Incorporated, may open the door to greater inflows of institutional money, while also making it easier to bet on Bitcoin's decline. Either way, it is likely trading will start slowly, says Mike Novogratz, Chief Executive Officer of Galaxy Investment Partners, which is raising a crypto hedge fund targeted at $500 million. If people have expectations that it's going to have huge liquidity on day one, they're just wrong, Novogratz said Thursday in Toronto. It's going to take a while to build liquidity. People need to go through at least one cycle and figure out how it settles. Absolutely fucking true, by the way. And this is something I've been talking a lot about with the people who talk to me about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Just because it was able to make such a huge jump in Q4 of this year doesn't mean, it's just going to keep growing like that. We are going to see it fall and settle at a point somewhere between $9,000 and $12,000 USD per Bitcoin. But one thing we're also going to see is the increased use of the millibitcoin, which is merely just a fractional calculation on Bitcoin that makes it easier to manage on a personal level, which it's still a Bitcoin, but it operates with calculations at 1/1000th the value of a single Bitcoin, something much easier to use for purchasing, trading, and sales, essentially. Derivatives trading is the culmination of a wild year for Bitcoin, which captured imaginations and investment around the world, propelled by stratospheric gains and its anti-establishment mission as a currency without the backing of a government or central bank, and a payment system without reliance on banks. The derivatives contracts should thrust Bitcoin more squarely into the realms of regulators, banks, and institutional investors. In addition to the contracts at SIBO and CME, which will start trading December 18th, Cantor Fitzgerald LP won approval from regulators to trade binary options, and LedgerX, a startup exchange, already trades Bitcoin options. By the way, if you're in the United States or Canada and want to trade Bitcoin, LedgerX is amazing. They're the only place I've found better than Kraken in the US, and I still recommend Kraken in Europe, but go check out LedgerX. It's quite awesome. There will be a ramp-up time, said Ari Paul, Chief Investment Officer of Block Tower Capital Investors. There just isn't a rush. The professional traders will mostly be looking to do arbitrage between futures and Bitcoin itself. I don't expect massive money flows right away, but then I expect gradual buying from people who want passive exposure without buying Bitcoin directly. Two exchanges on December 1st got permission to offer the contracts after pledging to the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, or CFTC, that the products don't run afoul of the law in a process called self-certification. Derivatives should have the effect of bringing a deeper liquidity to the market, which should reduce volatility, said Alastair Milne, Chief Investment Officer and co-founder of Altana Digital Currency Fund that is based in Monaco. As a whole, cryptocurrency economy gets bigger, the volatility should reduce. It's still going to be volatile, don't get me wrong, but we're not going to see swings in the ballpark of $2,000 in a single month, which Bitcoin is still recovering from. Ethereum is probably a much better place to look at volatility as they build what they call the Solidity program. And this is definitely something you should look into, because Solidity is a system of developing programmable contracts that are automatically fulfilled by the mining process. So instead of the blockchain just being a ledger, now you have a ledger that will automatically trigger contracts and programmatic streams of functionality with the at the point of mining that block within the ledger. But not everyone is convinced it's a good idea. On December 6th, the Futures Industry Association, a group of major banks, brokers, and traders, said the contracts were rushed without enough consideration of the risks. Last month, Thomas Peterfree, a billionaire chairman of Interactive Brokers Group Incorporated, wrote an open letter to the CFTC chairman, J. Christopher Giancarlo, arguing that Bitcoin's large price swings mean its futures contracts shouldn't be allowed on platforms that clear other derivatives. Still, Interactive Brokers will offer its customers access to the futures, though with greater restrictions. They won't be able to go short, betting that the prices decline, and Interactive margin requirement, or how much investors have to set aside as collateral, will be at least 50%. That's higher than either CBOE or CME's margin requirements. CBOE's futures are cash settled and based on the Gemini auction price for Bitcoin in US dollars. The exchange plans to impose trading limits to curb volatility, halting trading for 2 minutes if prices rise or fall 10%, and a 5-minute halt kicks in at 20%. Margins for CBOE Bitcoin futures, which will be cleared by Options Clearing Corp, will be at 40% or higher. CBOE's futures market is a niche player in derivatives trading, which could limit how many contracts change hands in the initial days. Fueled by contracts on the VIX, CBOE Futures Exchange handled 56 million contracts during the first 3 quarters of 2017, according to data compiled by the Futures Industry Association, the industry's trade and lobbying group. CME traded 3.1 billion contracts in the same period. So what we're looking at here is perhaps one of the biggest shakeups of the market that we're going to see, even with these limitations and controls in place. You are absolutely going to have to invest 50% as compared to the 10% which most investors would be familiar with. In addition to that, having futures on the market as a mediary between I'm sorry, there's people talking in the background. It's making it a little harder to think. Having futures serve as a mediary between markets and the blockchain itself are going to create a system where people are able to essentially buy value in Bitcoin without buying Bitcoin itself. And that is actually going to, while that may seem worrisome, it's going to create stability. It's going to reduce volatility. It's going to make sure that what we're seeing is a much more assured price for the long term. So while we might be seeing Bitcoin jump from 11,000 to 16,000 to 12,000 to 14,000, on a daily basis right now, that price is going to stabilize. And the commodity that is nothing more than the service of mining and ledgering a decentralized coin is going to find its actual value in a larger, currently central bank run world. and allow it to exist alongside the Keynesian model, as a few people have pointed out in the chat. Oh, adorable. Someone wants to know how to unlock an iPhone 4. I'm sorry, that's not what we're here for. But yeah, this is a huge step, because not only does this gives legitimacy to Bitcoin. You're not going to be seeing Bitcoin as a distant and fringe item anymore. More and more, not only are you going to be able to interact with Bitcoin abstractly through the the Chicago commodities markets, you are going to be able to directly interact with it in the United States, especially through exchanges, which are going to be much more stable and much more capable of maintaining the price that you want to buy or sell at. The way it is. This is a huge thing for the blockchain market. And while Bitcoin is definitely the first on board, as Ethereum grows, Bitcoin will sit as our, I always use this metaphor, Bitcoin is platinum, but Ethereum is going to be gold. And once that gold has this platform on which you can create subtokens, which you can execute contracts through miners, what you're going to end up with is commodities that are entirely digital. True commodities, true commodities, because they're absolutely, they absolutely have fiat nature to them. People's faith is what makes Bitcoin worth, what is it at right now, 14,000? But at the same time, that's no different than gold. That's no different than platinum. People want these things because they perceive them as valuable, not because they're actually valuable. This is a huge, huge, huge step for everything, and I'm extremely impressed by it all. I'm very happy that this is what's going to happen. And in the trend of good news coming out this week, we've actually got something that I'm very happy to let you guys know. ISIS is nearly dead. And I'm not joking when I say that. There's been a lot of coverage of this. However, I don't think a lot of people understand quite what the Islamic State is. So I wanted to take the time to review and go over some details about the Islamic State. The reason ISIS is a thing is because the Islamic State is a developed separate caliphate, which does not see any authority other than itself, and is, certainly funded by Saudi Arabia, by Israel, by the United States, and provided weapons in order to serve as privateers in the ongoing proxy wars between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But with Russia's involvement and Trump's dedication to the complete obliteration of ISIS, what was once a growing and terrifying possible new nation, taking large swaths of land from both the southeastern border of Syria and the northwestern border of Iraq, has now been reduced to something in the ballpark of 700 square miles along that border, very tightly contained. Now, the articles I'm going to read you will try and pass this off as if that entire border has been secured. However, it hasn't. And there are downsides to the disbursement and destruction of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Primarily, that for at least the next 6 months, what we're going to be seeing is a constant outflow of these ISIS warriors, completely displaced by the direct offensive provided by the United States and Russia, forcing these people into Europe, back into Saudi Arabia, into Iran, into Egypt and Northern Africa, and creating terror there in order to create the image, the idea that ISIS is still as strong as it once was. But it's not. These are going to be fringe groups without any leadership to which they hold authority, merely trying to maintain the ideology that is so important to them that will ultimately be their downfall. From the BBC, Iraq declares war with Islamic State is over. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, I always fuck those names up, told a conference in Baghdad that Iraqi troops were now in complete control of the Iraqi-Syrian border. The border zone contained the last few areas IS held, the ISIS state, following its loss of the town of Rawah in November. The U.S. State Department welcomed the end of vile corruption of IS in Iraq and said the fight against the group would continue. Iraq's announcement comes 2 days after the Russian military declared it had accomplished its mission of defeating IS in neighboring Syria. The jihadist group has seized large swaths of Syria and Iraq in 2014 when it proclaimed a caliphate and imposed its rule over some 10 million people. But it suffered a series of defeats over the last 2 years, losing Iraq's second city of Mosul this July and its de facto capital of Raqqa in northern Syria last month. Some ISIS fighters are reported to have dispersed into the Syrian countryside, and others believed are to have escaped across the Turkish border. This is why I believe we should have concern over these terrorists entering Europe, because, well, let's face it, Turkey has no interest in preventing ISIS pretending to be refugees and crossing unfettered into Europe through Greece and other, is it the Black Sea or the Caspian Sea? I always fuck that up. It's got to be the Black Sea, crossing over the Black Sea in order to get into Europe. This is undeniably a proud moment for Mr. Abadi, a victory that once looked like it might only ever be rhetorical rather than real. But if the direct military war with the Islamic State in Iraq is genuinely over, and the country's elite forces can now step back after a conflict that's taken a huge toll on them, it doesn't mean the battle against the group's ideology or its ability to stage an insurgency is finished, whether in Iraq, Syria, or the wider world. Attacks may be at a lower level than they once were, but Iraqi towns and cities still fall prey to suicide bombers. And while the conditions that fueled the growth of jihadism remain, even in the territory that's been recaptured. I wanted to show you this map specifically because this is actually a really great map. So here we have the southeast and eastern borders of Syria bordering on Iraq. And this is 2015, when they basically controlled land as far as up to the roads of Baghdad, across that border into Turkey. This is what people mean when they say the Islamic State. This is what people say when they mean the Islamic State. This entire landmass marked in red. However, as of today, the only things they control are this section of border and their current capital, Al-Qaim. And given that's on the Iraqi side, we're going to own that probably by, February. That'll probably be reclaimed by the United States by February. Now, they don't own much historical land left. However, this border is specifically an important border. This is one of the borders that was defined by the so-called Lawrence of Arabia way back at the end of World War I. And it was defined specifically to separate Kurds from Sunnis, I believe. I can't remember off the top of my head if it was Sunnis or Shiites. But essentially trying to create a section here for the Kurds who are still considered third-class citizens within the region. Everyone still hates the Kurds, which is going to be a problem. However, the Kurds have been a large factor in the defeat of ISIS. The United States joins the government of Iraq in stressing that Iraq's liberation does not mean the fight against terrorism and even against ISIS in Iraq is over. The UK Prime Minister Theresa May congratulated Mr. Abadi on a historic moment, but warned that IS still posed a threat, including from across the border in Syria. Last month, Syrian military said it had fully liberated the eastern border town of Abu Kamal, the last urban stronghold of IS in that country. Not quite. Al-Qaim is still a problem. On Thursday, the head of the Russian General Staff's operations, Colonel General Sergei Rudskoy, said the mission to defeat bandit units of the Islamic State terrorist organization on the territory of Syria carried out by the armed forces of the Russian Federation has been accomplished. And of course we have a timeline, but I also wanted to go to this specific article because this actually goes into detail about the continuing war that our nation is going to be fighting on the Iraqi side in completely dismantling this caliphate. Go away, I don't like your face. Hundreds of ISIS fighters have just been chased out of a northern Syrian city and were fleeing through the desert in long convoys, presenting an easy target to U.S. A-10 Warthogs. But the orders to bomb the black-clad jihadists never came, and the terrorists melted into their caliphate, living to fight another day. The events came in August 2016, and even as the then Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump was vowing on the campaign trail to let generals in his administration crush the organization that, under President Obama, had grown from the JV team to the world's most feared terrorist organization. I will quickly and decisively bomb the hell out of ISIS, Trump, who would name legendary Marine Corps General James Mattis as Secretary of Defense, promised. We will not have to listen to the politicians who are losing the war on terrorism. Just over a year later, ISIS has been routed from Iraq and Syria with an ease and speed that surprised even the men and women who carried out the mission. Experts say that it's a prime example of a campaign promise kept. President Trump scrapped his predecessor's rules of engagement, which critics say hamstrung the military, and let battlefield decisions be made by generals in the theater, rather than bureaucrats in Washington. At its peak, ISIS held land in Iraq and Syria that equaled the size of West Virginia, ruling over as many as 8 million people, controlling oil fields and refineries, agriculture, smuggling routes, and vast arsenals. Oh, LT. LT's in the background there having little dreams. Easy, baby. You're woofing in your sleep, baby. It ran a brutal, oppressive government, even printing its own currency. The terror organization now controls just 3% of Iraq and less than 5% of Syria. Its self-styled caliph, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is believed to be injured and holed up somewhere along the lawless border of Syria and Iraq. ISIS remains a danger as members who once ruled cities and villages like the quasi-government now live secretly among civilian populations within the region, in Europe and possibly in the U.S. These cells will likely present a terrorist threat for years. In addition, the terrorist organization is attempting to regroup in places such as the Philippines, Libya, and the Sinai Peninsula. It's also important to note that not just the Philippines, but Indonesia has a growing ISIS population, and we might see the war on terrorism move from the Middle East, strangely enough, to the Pacific theater. This is a very important detail. If the Philippines, Guam, and Indonesia begin serving as outposts for these terrorists, we're going to basically see a repeat of the situation that we saw originally, in which anyone who needs these countries to bend to their will begin funding and arming these, what should we call them, ISI and, well, basically Islamic State terrorists, in order to see their proxy war results rather quickly. This is something that has happened time and time and time again, and it wasn't just ISIS. After all, it's pretty common knowledge now that Al-Qaeda was entirely brought up and strengthened by the United States CIA throughout 1981 to 1988 in order to serve as a military in the proxy war against Russia. But the military's job, to take back the land ISIS claimed as its caliphate and liberate cities like Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria, as well as countless smaller cities and villages, is largely done, and it's taken less than a year. Thanks to this man. Fucking Ura, my friends. The leadership team that is in place now has certainly enabled us to succeed, Brigadier General Andrew Croft, the ranking U.S. Air Force officer in Iraq, told Fox News. I couldn't ask for a better leadership team to work for, to enable the military to do what it does best. President Trump gave a free hand to Mattis, who in May stressed military commanders were no longer being slowed by Washington decision cycles, or by the White House micromanaging that existed under President Obama. As a result of the new approach, the fall of ISIS in Iraq came even more swiftly than hardened U.S. military leaders expected. Skipping ahead a little bit. We used precision strikes and completely in accordance with international standards, he said. We didn't lower the standard, not one little bit, but we were able to exercise that precision capability without distraction, and I think the results speak for themselves. The U.S.-led coalition said this week, the Coalition Civilian Casualty Assessment Team has added 30 new staffers to travel throughout the region. It said military leaders continue to hold themselves accountable for actions that may have caused unintentional injury or death to civilians. This is an important detail to note. The Coalition Civilian Casualty Assessment Team is not just the U.S., however, it is led by the U.S., and we're talking about 150 people whose sole job is to go out with translators, another 300 to 500 people, and find out just how much damage this war has caused and create a running tally of expenses and redevelopment costs that are going to need to be taken in order to make sure that Syria and Iraq are able to recover from these wars, from this caliphate especially. A major part of the next year or two when it comes to Iraq, Syria, as well as Egypt, Libya, and the lawless Turkish borders, is going to be figuring out where and how we have hurt the people and how we can fix that. Because war doesn't end once you take the land back. It ends once people start to recover. And, I mean, I bet people will disagree with me on that subject. However, it's extremely important to note, you don't really have a choice, do you? Even after World War II, the United States had no choice but to stay in Berlin when Germany was going through essentially the exact same thing, and Russia was attempting to create a communist East German state as a buffer against the West. And extra credits, the guys who do pretty feminist videos, they also have their extra history series. They did a pretty good video on the Berlin airlift that I definitely recommend you watch. They cover it remarkably fairly, and it'll give you an idea of what it's like to rebuild a country that is still under attack even after the war is over. In addition to the coalition also said dozens of reports of civilian casualties have been determined to be non-credible, and just 0.35% of the almost 57,000 separate engagements carried out between August 2014 and October 2017 resulted in a credible report of civilian casualty. In addition to air support, the U.S.-led strategy also includes training and equipping Iraqi troops on the ground. By the way, if those bots are bothering you, just out-spam them. I don't care if you're spamming in chat. Just, talk about what I'm talking about. Make sure that there's not enough room for the idiots, because I'm not personally offended by bots coming into my chat. That just kind of increases the numbers of when it comes to people watching the video, and I need those numbers. So I'm not really going to fuck with them, because at the end of the day, those numbers are what's going to help me grow, even if they are shitty bots. And I don't know if that sounds like cheap or not, but I mean, like, what, am I going to ban the bots? They're jumping around and wasting, it's a waste of energy, and they're not going to get anything out of y'all, are they? So I apologize that they're there, but if you guys start talking over them, it's going to make them invisible essentially. So don't worry about them too much. While the Trump administration's success is often underplayed in the US media, it is obvious on the ground in Iraq, according to a spokesman for Iraq's Ministry of Defense, Yahya Razul. I was not optimistic when Trump first came into office, Razul said, but after a while I started to see a new approach, the way the U.S. was dealing with arming and training. I saw how the coalition forces were all moving faster to help the Iraq side more than before. There seemed to be a lot of support. Under Obama, we did not get this. But despite victories on the battlefields, U.S. officials cautioned much work remains to be done. ISIS is very adaptive, noted Colonel Ryan Dillon, the U.S.-led coalition spokesman. We are already seeing smaller cells and pockets that take more of an insurgent guerrilla-type approach, as opposed to an Islamic army or conventional-type force. So we've got to be prepared for that. He said as a result, the coalition is adjusting some training efforts so the Iraqi forces, upwards of 150,000 have already undergone training, are equipped to address such threats and ensure long-term stability. Folsom said the worst thing we could do is not finish the job. If a country becomes a failed state, it becomes a lawless region, and you begin to set the conditions for what happened in the years before 9/11. In those ungoverned spaces where we don't know what's going on, that is where the seeds of extremism begin to blossom. Now, this is extremely amazing, but also a very delicate time, which is why so much focus is being put on understanding the casualty rates as well as the collateral damage concerns that have been created. And while Fox News would never admit it, this coalition is a U.S. and Russian coalition in addition to a coalition between Iraq, Syria, and the United States. We are finally reaching a point where more good news is coming out instead of fear-mongering bullshit about the region. And as ISIS loses its power, not only in inciting fear in the United States and Russia, as well as capturing the eyes of the mass media who are losing their control, yet again a subject we'll be getting to soon, what we're going to begin to see is perhaps one of the first times since I've been alive that a rebuilding military operation is in order. We're not going to be seeing terror stories. We're going to be seeing hero stories in which military soldiers and officers find creative solutions to help the people of Iraq, the people of Syria, and at a much lower cost. And we might actually get to see some what people might call puff pieces, but positive stories coming out of all places, Iraq and Syria. This is absolutely amazing, and this is a story that I think everyone should be hearing about. So I'm very glad that we're there, and I mean, I'm not sure what else there is to say about the subject. I mean, there's a lot that has to be done. If you saw that map, you probably noticed that we're talking about most of Syria, most of central Syria had become that Islamic state, that caliphate nation, and at this point, what we're seeing is just a small lawless border section. But all of that section that used to be part of the caliphate has to be rebuilt, and international humanitarian efforts are going to have to be focused on rebuilding schools, rebuilding government infrastructure, rebuilding road infrastructure, rebuilding houses, apartments and tenements, in order to make sure that these people have the strength they need and feel like they're supported by the world and not dismissed by the people who came in and dropped bombs left and right. We're not going to be seeing an end to the constant flow of immigrants and refugees and so-called immigrants and refugees out of that region going through Turkey. Turkey wants nothing more than to create a so-called secular caliphate, and Erdogan wants to be the leader of that caliphate, which is why he is perhaps the biggest problem that we have in the Middle East right now, aside from, of course, Iran. However, Iran isn't our problem, it's Russia's. Iran is Russia's private oil field, and if the Shah there fucks up, well, Russia's going to be the one to solve the problem, not the United States. This ties into the stories I've been talking about regarding the crown prince of the Al Saud family, Mohammed bin Salman, essentially killing off the Wahhabist elements in his government, and if not killing them off, exiling them permanently, and replacing them in preparation for the passing on of the crown. And once that happens, we're going to see a new Saudi Arabia. Now, is it going to be the Saudi Arabia that everyone wants? Hell no. They're still completely centralized on oil, which, whether you are a communist nation or a monarchy like Venezuela or Saudi Arabia, that dependency on a single commodity is a huge problem, which leads to people having to make very difficult decisions, usually making the wrong decisions in order to appease people at the expense of interactions with the greater world. And usually at the expense of the people that they're trying to appease as well, because wealth that comes from a single commodity can only provide wealth to a very central location, in this case, Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. If you look at Saudi Arabia, sure, Riyadh and Mecca and Medina are wealthy, but the rest of it is still very tribal in nature, and it's going to take them decades to transform from essentially, the Middle Eastern version of North Korea into a nation that is worth seeing on the national stage, that isn't operating entirely out of selfish interests. But we're reaching a point, finally, where we can stop worrying about, well, not stop worrying, but worry slightly less about the ongoing proxy wars between the Wahhabists and the Shia Muslims, and actually focus on bigger problems. For example, the European Union. And that was an amazing fucking transition there. That was great. I am so glad I was able to make it to the European Union, because that's my next story. Because I say the European Union, but Germany, old Fourth Reich, my friends, wants a United States of Europe. From The Economists, the SPD's substance on Europe does not live up to its largely symbolic rhetoric. Martin Schulz baffled many, particularly outside Germany, with his call yesterday for a United States of Europe by 2025. Can you fucking believe that? I mean, after 3 attempts at a German Reich, which would have spanned most of Europe, taking over Prussia, Austria, Hungary, and France. Now, instead of doing it with guns, they're doing it with money. And they're arguing for it from a position of weakness at that, because the Social Democrats are not in a position to be able to ask such a thing. So they are gambling quite a lot at that request. And it's something that the Christian Democrats and the Christian Socialists are not going to accept. So it seems kind of crazy, but let's get further into this story before we just pass the idea off flat out. The Social Democrat Party leader was addressing his party's conference from a position of weakness, following its worst election result, 20.5%, in post-war history, and ahead of a crucial vote of delegates on whether or not to talk to the center-right Christian Democrats/Christian Socialists alliance about another grand coalition. Why this now? What was he up to? It helps to revisit a scene from his doomed election campaign, documented by Marcus Feldenkirchen of Der Spiegel. It was June. The initial surge of support for the SPD following Mr. Scholz's emergence as Chancellor candidate earlier in the year, a Scholz hype, had faded. How to recapture that energy? In a meeting at the SPD's headquarters, Mr. Scholz insisted on going big in his upcoming speech to the party's pre-election conference. He would be authentic, visionary even. He would speak from the heart as a convinced European and demand a United States of Europe. He would contrast this commitment with the vague, tactical inoffensiveness of Angela Merkel. Give me a second. Someone's knocking at my door and I don't think they're going to walk away. Sorry about that. Roommate ordered a pizza or something. Several days later, his team came back with a version of the speech shorn of the daring bits, including the call for the United States of Europe. They informed a despondent Mr. Scholz that, according to party research, voters did not want confrontation. The SPD conference that followed was a Merkel-ishy anodyne affair, one of many such moments in which the former European Parliament president seemed incapable of speaking in his own voice, transfixed by the Chancellor's popularity and crippled by caution. He barely mentioned the subject on which he is most authoritative and passionate, the EU and Germany's vocation within it. At the election, the SPD lost votes to parties of all political shades. But a common criticism among deserting voters was that it did not seem to know for what it stood. That the arithmetic of the result made a possible Jamaica coalition of the Christian Democrats, Christian Socialists, the pro-business Free Democrats, and the Greens was thus also a blessed consolation. The Social Democrats immediately announced that they would return to opposition to rebuild and rediscover their identity. But the collapse of the Jamaica talks, Jamaica being the three colors of the parties put together, the green, the yellow, and the black, on November 19th, forced the party, green, yellow, and red, under intense pressure to provide a stable government for Europe's largest economy, to contemplate a third round of coalition with Miss Merkel. Mr. Scholz was among the SPD leaders most loath to take this step, fearing that another punishing 4 years of government could finish off the party as a leading force in German politics. Weakened, reluctant, and facing an anti-coalition insurgency from his party's youth branch, he needed a story to tell about this volte-face, a cause of such magnitude that the SPD could justify a return to government on new terms, and a grand project around which the party could erect a cordon and proclaim, "This is ours." Such were the circumstances yesterday in which Mr. Scholz revived the speech he had been persuaded not to give in the summer, the speech making the idealistic Social Democrat case for a federal Europe. The SPD's leader began with an apology for the election, resulting so groveling that Die Welt compared it to a lachrymose therapy session. Then came the redemption stage. People, Europe is our life insurance. It's the only chance we have of keeping up with the other great nations of the world. Only with a federal Europe, said Mr. Scholz in a passage aimed squarely at the SPD's coalition skeptic left, could Germany and its neighbors confront common challenges like tax evasion, corporate abuses, and the migration crisis. The continent cannot afford 4 more years of German-European policy à la Schäuble, reference to Wolfgang Schäuble, Miss Merkel's former finance minister. Emmanuel Macron loomed large. Mr. Scholz echoed the French president's commitment to a convention of European civic society. His talk of a federal moment by 2025 reflected Mr. Macron's timetable. The president wants to achieve several of his more integrationist proposals by 2024. His bizarre and indeed illegal demand that countries that do not endorse a new constitution be ejected from the EU was, it seems, a clumsy attempt to align his ideas with Mr. Macron's vision of a multi-speed Europe, with a core moving faster towards integration than other parts. There were two main audiences. The first, principal one, was the party, and particularly the delegates in the hall. Mr. Scholz was telling them something like, "You and I, comrades, we are not the mushy technocrats of public imagination, but idealists." Oh, because none of that sounds like a terrible thing to say post the fall of the the USSR. "We have a vision of how the world could be different, a big idea. And it follows from this that we will stand up to the CDU/CSU like we have not done in the past. We do grand coalition differently next time." It worked. Delegates voted about 2-1 for exploratory and open-ended, i.e. coalition-oriented talks with Mrs. Merkel, and 82% of them voted for Mr. Scholz to remain leader, albeit from a menu of one. In other words, he was unchallenged, so he was free to get away with this in any way that he wanted. The second audience was the sort of voter that the SPD needs in order to hit the mid-20s vote share needed to show it is still in the game, if not in the 30-40% range, which the Chancellery comes to reach. That voter, the lowest hanging fruit, is the sort of well-educated, probably public sector urban type, whom Mr. Scholz should have won over easily, but who abandoned the SPD for Mrs. Merkel's liberalized Christian Democrats, the Greens, or the left in the September election. One lesser-noted achievement of his speech was that Alexander Dobrindt, CSU transport minister and the sort of right-wing politician whom a distinctive, self-confident SPD probably ought to put off, attacked Mr. Scholz's wide-eyed proposal as that of a Europe radical. Yet one speech does not a relaunch make. It is covered in today's German newspapers, but without much fanfare. Mrs. Merkel yesterday merely brushed aside Mr. Scholz's talk of a federal Europe, saying the EU should concentrate on improving its practical ability to act, referring to the EU army, for which they have allocated $5 billion in arms and resources, not long-term visions. Judging by his lackluster election campaign, Mr. Scholz has a habit of flitting restlessly between subjects without prosecuting any long enough to make an impact, and a habit of letting his rhetoric get far ahead of the substance. His lofty talk of rewriting Germany's social contract was not born out in his party's modest social justice proposals, for example. Anyone in the German political establishment can speak nice words and grand ideals on Europe, and many have been doing so in recent weeks. Fewer are offering much serious detail. I'm just going to stop right here and take a moment to say that the fact that it's Germany saying this and trying to act in response to Macron pushing the EU to federalize and further expand its own power kind of shows a little bit of historical ignorance on the part of politicians vying for that dominant majority strength in Germany. This is an absolutely horrific idea. This is beyond stupid, and not for absolutely obvious reasons, but also for less than obvious reasons. I want you to consider nations like Poland, Romania, Hungary, Belarus, Italy, and even Bosnia-Herzegovina and Greece. A lot of these countries are very dependent on the EU, and the EU has served to essentially steal sovereignty from those nations through the use of what are so-called trade deals, which aren't trade deals at all because of the severely unbalanced and unfair advantage it gives the EU and France and Germany in specific. Someone earlier in the chat said something amazing, and they said that it's much more the EU is much more concerning than the Middle East right now, and that's absolutely true. There was an article someone linked me earlier today talking about the barbarians were already in the gates in Rome. People like to condemn the United States for being so much like Rome. However, that has also been one of our greatest strengths, is that we were influenced greatly by Rome, but also took efforts like the Electoral College, like the divided senators and representatives, the three-layer cake of how laws and bills are passed into laws, rather, as a safeguard against the dictatorial system that could evolve from crisis that Rome had. The EU has none of that. In fact, it doesn't have anything but fiscal control over weak countries due to their necessary dependence on trade with essentially Germany and France. After Brexit, what we've witnessed is an enormous change in the way that France and Germany have had to manage themselves, because they no longer have their number two funder for the EU, Britain, providing so much in the way of benefits to all of these other nations. And by taking themselves out of the picture, as England, as as Great Britain has, France and Germany have had almost no choice but to think about either focusing on themselves and their needs, or stealing sovereignty from other nations in order to distract from the problems that they have at home. We talk about France and Germany as if they're one nation, but historically, France as one nation is very variable. There are German and Belgian and Norman and Italian factions within France. Northern France is very different from southern France, is very different from central France, which is very different from the France that borders Germany. And likewise, Germany is very, very distinct states, each with their own culture, each with their own resources and identities, honestly. And treating them all as a single entity has not served the best. I mean, they've been great, but these are areas that are, in a geopolitical sense, going to succeed one way or the other. France will always have strong position when it comes to energy exports, when it comes to food exports. Germany is always going to be extremely strong when it comes to resources and when it comes to industrial imports and exports, as well as its control over the roads between east, west, and south. But you don't see that same thing in Poland. You don't see that same thing in Romania. These countries could do well on their own without the EU, because the EU actually costs them more. People from Italy are able to outsell Romanian and Polish farmers by huge amounts, by completely bypassing VAT taxes, by forging documents in order to completely ignore the taxes and regulations put upon them, and by selling cheaper, lower quality products in these Eastern European nations. They are essentially screwing the Romanian people, the Polish people, out of being able to maintain their own businesses, whether that be in farming or in high industry and high tech. And this is one of the reasons that you see, especially Poland, serving as a bulwark against Germany when it comes to the European Parliament. Poland is never going to stand by and let a United States of Europe happen, because the United States of Europe is just the Fourth Reich. They've been through this many times before. Russia has stampeded and trampled all over them. Germany has stampeded and trampled all over them. Hell, Austria-Hungary has just trampled all over them, and they are done with it. They're a hardened people who are willing to argue, negotiate, and even shit talk on the floors of the European Parliament. The EU Parliament. in order to say, look, the more you try and push us into conforming, the more we're going to try and be as independent as possible. And Poland's not the only one. Greece may be entirely fiscally dependent on the EU, and Spain may be entirely fiscally dependent on the EU. But we're already seeing segments of Greece arguing for their own independence. Sections of northern Italy argue for their independence. We just watched last month the Catalonian independence movement attempt to and be forcibly stopped from voting on whether or not they would move towards independence. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year we see a number of new unrecognized states spring up in Europe. Because Europe is tearing itself apart in order to appease the unfair deals made by Germany and France in these smaller, weaker European nations, some of which landlocked, some of which just screwed by location and unable to produce the raw resources or industry in order to compete on a global scale. But by forcing them into the European Union trade deals and preventing them from having trade deals elsewhere because Germany and France say, no, if you do that, we're not going to give you this. While watching Italian, Spanish, and Belarusian crappier businesses outsell at lower prices without having to pay VAT taxes or get proper licensing within these Central Eastern nations like Romania and Poland, the EU is on the brink of a much greater separation. The EU cannot maintain that kind of strength. And for socialists, of all people, to be demanding this should absolutely be raising some red flags for everyone across Europe. And I'm not trying to condemn socialism, because I know that there's an appreciation for socialism, especially in France. Socialists played a huge part in the liberation of France in World War II, for example. But for them to be saying, hey, why don't we get more buddy-buddy and create a super state with Germany? That should raise some fucking red flags for the French people. For Eastern Germans to be hearing them say, hey, let's make a European superstate with France, well, that should be reminding them of the time of Napoleon. This is not a time when we should be watching idly as Europe does whatever the fuck they want. No, this is a time when the European people need to stand up and say, look, I want to be France. What's there's an idiom in French, I can't remember how to say it exactly, but my nation is the French language, or I come from the French language. This is what people in France should be saying. They should be saying it in German, their dialect of German, in Germany. They should be saying it in Polish. They should be saying it in Hungarian. They should be saying it in Romanian. It is time for European people to stand up for their individuality and their cultures. Because Europe, or should I say the two greatest dominant powers in Europe, appear to be trying to steal the rest of Europe from the rest of these grand old cultures. Whatever you may think of them, they are cultures that are strongly independent and do not have the same shared interests and same shared origins that the United States have. A United States of Europe would be the USSR all over again. And we're going to move into my last story for the night, which is an outright condemnation of CNN, because CNN has fucked up so much this week. It's fucking hilarious. I'm going to be reading you a few things that are literally just corrections, because these media companies in the United States have really really done some shitty things, and they have had to come out and make corrections all over the place. And it's not just CNN. Oh, shit, I wanted to start with this one. And you guys know I love the Daily Caller, so I wanted to read you their coverage of... Damn it, where is it? Oh, well. This is not quite the right article, but it'll step us into the right article. CNN misreported key details of an offer made to Donald Trump Jr. last year of a batch of stolen WikiLeaks documents. The story, which CNN published Friday and covered extensively on TV, was touted as the first evidence that Trump campaign was given a heads up about the documents stolen from Democrats. But the story appears to be riddled with errors and also lacking key context. This, of course, is the article I was just showing you, which has a correction up here which they had to put in place. This story has been corrected to say that the date of the email was September 14th, not September 4th. The story also changed the headline and removed a tweet from Donald Trump Jr., who posted a message about WikiLeaks on September 4th. Candidate Donald Trump, and you know, I don't even have to read this because it's complete bullshit. CNN, ABC, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, even Bloomberg have run with so many different articles, all started from CNN getting their facts wrong. And it's a fucking shit show for the mainstream media. Because this isn't the only thing that's gone wrong for them. This story, the Mueller investigation regarding subpoenas, Deutsche Bank records had to be updated, of course, because Deutsche Bank records related to Trump is what it used to say. They didn't even give a correction on this article, and this is Bloomberg Politics, a so-called trusted news outlet still. And of course, here's the Wall Street Journal's coverage of it. Unfortunately, I don't have a Wall Street Journal account, and I wouldn't give them my money if they fucking asked me in person. And of course, this has been updated in order to fix the problems, because the fact of the matter is, while Robert Mueller did have to subpoena Deutsche Bank, he did not subpoena anything related to Donald Trump, but rather people who were in his campaign who have nothing to do with the campaign anymore. Here is the Washington Post covering their asses. An article published, email pointed Trump campaign to WikiLeaks documents that were already public. This, of course, is them covering their asses about the same story here that CNN was covering their asses about. And here is an ABC News statement on the Michael Flynn report, an entire statement in which ABC News says, "We deeply regret and apologize for the serious error we made yesterday. The reporting conveyed by Brian Ross during the special report had not been fully vetted through our editorial standards process. As a result of our continued reporting over the next several hours, ultimately we determined the information was wrong and we corrected the mistake on air and online. It is vital we get the story right and retain the trust we have built with our audience. Those are our core principles. We fell far short of that yesterday. Effective immediately, Brian Ross will be suspended for 4 weeks without pay." This is the correction issued Friday. During a live special report, ABC News reported that a confidant of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn said Flynn was prepared to testify that then-candidate Donald Trump instructed him to contact Russian officials during the campaign. That source later clarified that during the campaign, Trump assigned Flynn and a small circle of other senior advisors to find ways to repair relations with Russia and other hotspots. It was shortly after the election that President-elect Trump directed Flynn to contract Russian officials on topics that included working jointly against ISIS, which of course is completely legal. This is an extremely important note. This is the part that the media has been ignoring, and I've been trying to share for quite a lot of time, by the way. That once he became the president-elect, it was completely within his rights and in fact his duty to reach out to Russia as well as other allied nations to begin to repair relationships as well as figure out what can be done for their coalition efforts in Syria and Iraq. This was not only legal, this is expected of president-elects to, in the 2 months that they have before the nomination ceremony, build up their connections with other countries, build up their connections with the parties, the party committees. It is absolutely their jobs, including Michael Flynn's job, to, at the behest of the president-elect, find ways to make contact and interact with Russia on the subject of ISIS, on the subject of repairing relationships, on the subject of anything that is in the best interests of the United States. And these stories, all of which are listed below if you'd like to go through them and pinpoint them detail for detail, will show you just how much of a shit show this really was. CNN has basically destroyed any credibility it has, and that is an extremely important thing for the future of our nation, because the problem at hand is not President Trump. As always, the president is at best a leader for a larger group of cabinet members and the veto vote, as well as the holder of executive privilege, which of course does not protect him from impeachment and impaneling, but does give him the power to wage wars as well as interact with foreign entities in order to repair relationships or expedite actions that the Senate and the House of Representatives are unable to move quickly upon when it serves the interests of the United States the best. And when it comes to the subject of ISIS, the reason the United States and Russia are so tightly knit these days, it is absolutely in their best interests to be speaking. It is absolutely in our best interests to be allies with the former, communist nation, which of course has very little to do with the former communist nation and is now a Russian federation of its own. And yes, there's reasons to be worried about Vladimir Putin as the center of a cult of personality, but Trump is the center of a cult of personality. Merkel is the center of a cult of personality. What's his name? Aido of Japan is the center of a cult of personality. You don't win elections these days without a cult of personality. You don't win elections without being boisterously strong and willing to make moves that your opponent aren't willing to make. And if those moves are in the interest of your country, if people agree with those movements, well, what you have is a very, very strong candidate for presidency / prime ministership / chancellorship. It's whether or not they act on those common interests that they hold with the people that they are meant to lead that determines whether a leader is a suitable leader for their country. And so far, President Trump has given us, but again, as I said, between 100 and 300,000 jobs per month through deals that have redeveloped our steel, coal, and development industries like cars. He has given us much greater security against terrorism through finally getting his third version of the so-called Muslim ban, which isn't a Muslim ban at all. It's a ban on some of the most destabilized nations which happen to have grand Muslim influences. Through the work he's done, President Trump has slashed taxes by 10% across the board for individuals and corporations alike, and has set the stage for what will serve as an image, something that will stand in his image and with his name, for decades to come, because it has been essentially forced into our future budgets. And that is, of course, the wall on our southern border. What we're going to be seeing, I'm sorry about that, Andrew Little. You weren't here earlier when I said it, but unfortunately YouTube just won't actually, everywhere I go now, I disabled all the censorship stuff, all that bullshit, and YouTube is still blocking like any curse words and asking me to review them. It's really fucking irritating. So I apologize. I'm trying to approve those messages the second I see them, because I do not want to censor my chat. But essentially what we have is a president doing exactly what he should, and a rebel media, if I might be so ironic with the title, attempting to defame and hide the truth about him because they didn't get their way, because he calls them out on their bullshit. And now, after a year of fighting, not only against a Democratic Party that wants nothing more than to stall and shut down the government in order to make Trump look bad, but also a media that wants to serve that Democratic National Committee. We are finally seeing the cracks in all of their stories. All of these lies coming to light that CNN has pushed, and through them have gotten pushed into ABC News, NBC News, the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg. All of these major outlets are being exposed as irresponsible, completely irresponsible, and completely untrustworthy. What we have is a stage set for a blank slate next year, in which, if the Democrats are able to survive at all in the elections, they will not be able to stand as strong as an independent third party. And even if so, the Republicans, by pushing independents, libertarians, and other third party candidates through their own party, taking over the Senate and the House once again. CNN has basically fucked over the Democrats, and the Democrats have fucked over the left and the poor for too long. And while it's going to be a hard road over the next 3 years, our country is finally being rebuilt, and I'm super fucking happy. I am overjoyed to say that after this year, I am more proud than I was when I voted for Donald Trump, because what we're seeing is the recovery of the United States after 8 years of complete destruction caused by those Democrats. This has been an amazing show. Thank you all so very much for coming out today, for coming and sharing these 2 hours with me. Part of what I'm going to be doing across the next month, moving into the new year, I'm going to be taking these videos, these streams, and I'm going to be cutting them, cutting out each segment of the each story segment out and uploading them across the week in order to have shorter, more digestible content uploaded on a regular basis. In addition, I've reinstated my Medium account. So whenever I get, whenever I come across a news story that I have to talk about at that moment, I'm going to be publishing articles over on Medium, and the link to that is going to be in the description box below, along with all of these news articles and the links to the memes and songs that I was playing earlier in the show. I'm going to be making a lot of changes, a lot of small changes to the channel. Nothing big, nothing extreme, just trying to make things a little better for y'all, because I know you all can't all of you can't watch a 2-hour news stream every Saturday. So I want to be able to produce more news content, and in addition, I want to be producing more gaming content. So if you want to, go catch me over on Twitch, because I'm going to be starting to do my Sunday streams, and hopefully I'm going to start with Sunday and Monday streams, And over the rest of this month, I'm going to be stretching that out to Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, in order to give myself a break on Thursdays and Fridays, just to have a weekend of sorts. I'm going to be fixing a lot of stuff. And of course, if you just want to support the channel, I've just got a subscriber from Dean Truelove. Thank you very much. As you can see, I've added a lot of the Streamlabs tools to my interface so that if you donate, if you subscribe, I get that information right here and I can give you a huge thank you. Because I'm here because I love spending my time with y'all. And while my health is not at its best, I'm still able to produce some great information for y'all, gather and share this information with y'all so that you all are able to make much better informed decisions about what people say and what people do. And since I've got a little bit of time, I will answer Dean's question. He says, I do hope that Social Security disability is not cut outright. I'm 95% unable to work due to various physical and mental problems, and gaming, we need those a lot. See, that's the thing. People think that it's getting cut outright, but it's not. The thing is, the policy in which one can completely bypass the work requirements if you are an able-bodied person, those loopholes are what's being cut. The amount of money allocated is going to be reduced, and a lot more focus is going to be placed on the states. I actually did a video about this last week. Unfortunately, I don't have the video recording of that. I'm going to have to download and cut that out for later. But the bill doesn't screw over Social Security disability. It merely screws over Social Security disability for those states which give it to immigrants and students and those who don't need it. I myself I can barely walk. If you guys saw me earlier when I was trying to go to the door, I walk with a very heavy limp, and this is something I don't talk with many people about. In addition, I am fighting with the state of Florida to get insurance right now for the purpose of dealing with my recurring cancer problems. Beyond that, I am pretty much persona non grata in the software development industry after multiple situations in which I was basically determined to not be liberal enough. And because of that, I have had to fight for every job I've had. And this is the first time in my life where I'm starting to think I'm in a position where I'll be able to maintain myself. And with or without Social Security disability, but those who need it most aren't going to have that problem, I can assure you of that. Those who absolutely need it are going to be able to get their Social Security disability. It's those who are taking advantage of the system, like as I was talking about at the very beginning of the show, Cuban and Puerto Rican migrants who come here and use a remarkably easy system to get state IDs and then pretend to be citizens. Those people are going to have a much rougher time. That said, we are pulling up on 9 p.m. and it is time for me to go. My throat is killing me. Thank you all so very much. Let me do a quick read off and thank you to everyone in the audience. A huge thank you to Dean Truelove, to Andrew Little, to Ottakeen Greenmoon, to my wonderful Akia Skeeth, my favorite little Frenchie. Thank you to Rick Sheck, to Egregious Charles. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to J. Will Series. Thank you to Broadcaster Nathaniel. Thank you to Al Jazeera. Wow, I really hope that's the real Al Jazeera. Oh no, I see the icon. Never mind. Great icon, by the way, there, Al Jazeera. I love it. Thank you to the Lord of Cancer, Senor del Cancer. Thank you to Michael Nahirniak. Thank you to Ghost Dog. Very much thanks for that donation. Thank you again to Rick Sheck, and that looks like everyone who is chatting in the audience. And remember, if you want a shout out, you just got to chat in the audience or send me a donation through Streamlabs, through Patreon, or through Super Chats, And I will definitely give you that shout out because I love you guys so much. I'm here for y'all. And until next time, bon la cow.
Coin-operated goy, scary but it's true. He is not a Jew. He won't touch the horror, won't light the menorah, and it's not a lie. He ain't even circumcised. Boy, coin-operated goy. I'm not so sure that he's kosher, despite what is in the brochure. Everything he eats is wrapped in ham. Plus he tried the pork meat in the can. I should go and ask my rabbi if it's a sin if he and I do it through a small hole in a sheet. Just big enough to slip my kosher meat. Groin, masticated joy, oh boy. Coin-operated goy, can't hang with the moils, he ain't got the coils. I say we convoy him, it ain't gonna hoid him. Or maybe down below he will have to undergo groin operation ploy. His breast will preform to make his schmuck deformed. The moil gets $1 if he makes him holler. To make his schmuck more slim, we'll chop off his foreskin. Give it to the Vader, he'll bless it for Seder. We'll nosh on it later. Oh, live on the, live on the, live on the, live on the, Ivan, 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 for Rosh Hashanah, a coin-operated goy, oh boy. Coin-operated goy, scary but it's true. He was not a Jew, but honestly no shitsva. He had the bar mitzvah, and now he's kosher too. He's just like me and you, a coin-operated Jew.